Welcome to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. In each episode of this podcast, we chat with energy experts from all around the world. We exchange on timely energy issues as well as their life experience. How did they get there? How did they make it work? You will learn a lot, whether you are an energy aficionado or a newbie. And one of my favorite parts of this podcast is the focus on their personal stories. I always find it very inspiring. It's November 8th, 2019, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today I'm exchanging with Marc-Antoine Eyl-Mazzega. Marc-Antoine works at IFRI, one of the prominent French think tank, and he's leading the Center for Energy and Climate since 2017. Before, he was working at the International Energy Agency. Marc-Antoine speaks German and French. He's a binational, and he studied at Sciences Po, like me, by the way. And his areas of research include oil, gas, Russia, Ukraine, Africa, and the European Union. Hi, Marc-Antoine.
Hello, great to be with you, Leslie.
Thank you very much for visiting us and the podcast. And so we can talk about many different things. Last time we discussed together coal, the European Union, the French-German relations on energy. But this time we decided to focus on the new European Commission and Ukraine. So let's delve right into this Green Commission that everybody seems to consider as the greenest ever. Mm-hmm. So first, what does it mean to be so green in comparison to the past commissions?
Okay. Yes, we are indeed at a tipping point in the energy and climate policies of the European Union. And frankly speaking, if we had spoken 6 months ago, or when we last spoke about the phasing out of coal in Germany, for example, I mean, you could not at that time imagine the pace of change, of political change that has occurred within a number of member countries of the European Union, but also in Brussels following the latest European elections. Very brief, a few key points. The first point is, up until recently, Germany was one of the countries that was reluctant to engage in the objective to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. That objective was pursued and put forward by countries like France, who has, 75% of its electricity generation coming from nuclear, so very, say, easier to do, obviously, than, for example, a country like Poland or Germany. You had the countries like Denmark or Sweden or Finland that were very pushy, but, these are smaller countries with a very large hydro availability or wind availability, etc. So some specificities. But now the real fundamental change is that there is now an overwhelming majority of European Union member countries that want to go towards climate neutrality by 2050.
So it means everybody's on board now.
Almost, except basically Poland. And we will see by the December 4th European Council meeting whether the Polish concerns have been addressed or not. The key issue with Poland is that basically the Poles say, well, we have this legacy of coal. It's 75% of our electricity generation. Obviously, we will face higher costs than others if we decarbonize. So basically, we need more money. We need more financial transfers, and that is now the issue that will be dealt with.
So, yeah, and on the ground, it means that each member state needs to come up with a plan within the next couple of years to phase out coal, but also, I guess, all the other fossil fuels.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. So as far as coal is concerned, I think the situation is now the following. We have, say, the vast majority of member countries that have phase-out plans for coal, and the most prominent one being Germany, which will phase out 40 gigawatt of coal over the next 17 or 15 to 17 years, probably earlier. Now, the only major coal capacity holding countries is Poland, and that will be, of course, more challenging. But Poland is working to deploy more wind, notably offshore wind, to deploy nuclear, to put a bit more gas in its energy mix, and will do many more efforts in the field of energy efficiency. So here it is happening, and what I just would like to inform you about, Leslie, is what happened. How did it come that now there is a majority, such an overwhelming majority to reach that goal? I think there's three factors. The first is really the demands from the citizens. There's been the European elections, so green parties and green movements gaining in votes in Germany, in France, notably. The climate concern, everybody over the summer felt the urgency of climate change. This is no more something abstract that is happening in Africa or in Southeast Asia or in a few remote islands here and there. No, this is something that people now understand will affect their daily lives, even in Europe. And I think the other fundamental aspect is that basically people increasingly understand that if we do not fix this, we will face greater instability globally, but especially that will affect the European Union. So there is a big push, and even Chancellor Merkel, who was reluctant, has now completely changed her position and is ready to go for that I would say, very ambitious and, of course, very critical policy step.
So on the ground, which sector do you think will be the most complicated to decarbonize?
Well, so far, the focus has been on the power sector. And I think all in all, with the progress that we saw with the low carbon technologies, be there solar, wind, and the grid integration, I mean, that is clearly, there's still a lot of work to be done there. But all in all, relatively, that seems rather now easy to do compared to the very hard issues, which will be the decarbonization of the transport sector, of the industry sector, and of the agricultural sector. And here, obviously, now you see that all the big industries, etc., are starting to think and plan, and hence why we have now a discussion also in Europe about carbon capture and storage or reutilization, but also about the potential of hydrogen, post 2030, especially in the industry. I mean, of course, decarbonized hydrogen, and overall also a renewed discussion on how far we can go with electrification of end users. That's point A, and considering that very clearly it will be very challenging to go towards full electrification, then the discussion goes over to, okay, how far can we go and how best can we basically intertwine that process with maximizing the potential from the existing natural gas grid, and then hence also the decarbonization of natural gas, and also how much more can we do in the field of energy efficiency, and how much flexibility can we need actually in tomorrow's energy system, and how much flexibility can the new technologies provide. And here I must say, nobody really knows. We still have to test. There's a lot of technologies that are not mature. We somehow see them, but we do not know how they will work together, right?
Yeah.
So we need to experiment.
Right. And this comes at a cost. So who is going to pay for it? And we know that in France last year, the Gilets jaunes was also an experience for the French government to understand that this decarbonization needs to be done also thinking about the lower social economic class of the society and to make it equal for everybody.
Absolutely. Very clearly, this is a make it or break it. I mean, if we fail in transforming our economies and our energies and our energy systems, if we fail, we might put at risk our democracies, we might put at risk our European economy. So the risks are tremendous. So this is like if you go to war against carbon, but this is a war you cannot lose, because if you lose that war, we might indeed suffer tremendously. And so hence why, we portray this as a war so that society and stakeholders, policy makers and industry leaders, etc., understand that this is about a tremendous mobilization. This is not about marginal adjustments here and there. This is about fundamentally changing the way we produce power, the way we consume energy, and the way our societies and economy works. Now, the key, I think there is 2 or 3 keys. The first is that we need incentives for investments, and those incentives will come from state regulation, and they will come from price signals coming from carbon instruments. And we have the ETS in place, the carbon price in Europe, but that will probably have to be complemented by a carbon price floor for power generation, and by continued reforms in this ETS system to reduce the numbers of free quota allocation, and in order to ensure that the price continues to rise. That's point A. Point B, what we need is we need to protect our economies from the outside world, in the sense that if we trigger these massive investments, this will come at tremendous cost, and the outside world goes in a business as usual scenario, well, then we will lose our competitiveness and we will lose our jobs. So the answer to that is to put some carbon adjustment mechanisms at the European Union borders, and to have a very active external energy and climate diplomacy to convince others and to exert power on others if needed, so that they also align their policies with the Paris Agreement.
So let me ask you about this, Marc-Antoine, because I think it has become a buzzword, this carbon border adjustment tax, especially in the transatlantic energy debate. And so from the EU's perspective, it's a tool for energy transition. It will accompany the European Commission in its goal, and it's motivated to by the fact that they want EU businesses to compete moving forward. But from the US perspective, this could be perceived as a retaliatory trade tariff in disguise. And the US could perceive any climate-related restriction on imports, let's say, of natural gas, as a trade tool that will harm the US companies. So do you think there is a potential for growing misunderstanding between the EU and the US?
Yes, I think there is. But I think there is because of the politicians that you have in the US, and especially the President Trump, and also because indeed there is room for misunderstanding. Now, if you look at the very core of that issue, in fact, the US could also be a winner from that. Why? Let me explain. The first thing is, no matter what, the United States has to curb methane leakage, gas flaring, and overall its methane emissions, because this has been growing as oil production has been rising. And this is a fundamental issue that the United States urgently needs to address, because this is really getting very bad for the US greenhouse gas footprint. That's point A. Point B is that if you look at the United States, the United States economy has been decarbonizing over the last decades, and it will probably continue to do so, because you phased out, basically, via the economics of natural gas and of renewable energy sources, the coal from your power generation mix. And I think this is essential. So all in all, if we take these carbon border mechanisms, I think trade between the European Union and the United States actually should not be that affected, because a lot of electricity generation, or say an increasing share of power generation in the United States, is lower carbon, if not low carbon, but much lower carbon and much lower carbon intensive. So I think overall, if the drive to ease the methane emission regulation, etc., if that is stopped and the United States continues on on this current trend, I think there's no big issue with the United States. I mean, the issues will probably be rather like with economies like China, where clearly the number of imported goods that come from China, because China has a lot of coal-fired power generation, because the efficiency and the number of Chinese steel mills, etc., may not be at the required level. Well, obviously here there will be much greater challenges. But all in all, this mechanism will not affect all the goods that are imported to the European Union. It will focus on a selection of goods that are particularly sensitive economically and that have a very high carbon sensitivity. And the idea behind that is to make this fully WTO compatible, but, and that is a side comment, it also will much depend on whether the United States continues to see the WTO as the backbone of the international trade system or not. Because what we need, and from our perspective in the European Union, we need a WTO, but we need a reformed WTO that does two things: that reforms the way bilateral disputes are settled, that reforms the way it incorporates state subsidies, because obviously the system where the Chinese continue to subsidize and face no consequence is not possible, but also that includes the constraints from the Paris Agreement on climate. So these are three pillars of transformation of the WTO, and the question is the United States going to help reform that? And hence win from that, or is it going to exit it fully, and then we enter a territory that is really, really, really going to be bad for everyone?
And if we head into a world where we have labels and certification, let's say for green or sustainable gas, and does it mean we have a standardized way to monitor and quantify and measure those emissions, and everybody is on the same page on how to measure the life cycle
Yes,
of
I
those
think,
fuels?
Leslie, this is essential. We need to speak the same language on that, which means that, like we do the IFRS, standardized financial reporting all across the Atlantic, the same standards and norms will have to be applied to measuring these kinds of emissions, absolutely. And be it from the methane leakage issue I mentioned, be it to certify, what is a decarbonized gas and what is not, etc. So here I see an absolutely fundamental area of cooperation between the United States and the European Union for the next 4 or 5 years, because if we do not get this right, we will definitely harm the potential of natural gas. We will harm the potential of a number of sustainable technologies to play their role, and all in all, it will harm our mutual commercial interests.
Good. I wanted to mention also something interesting, which is the UK is about to exit the European Union, but it's a good example of a country that in a very, rapid manner decreased the amount of coal used in power generation. Like over the past 12 months, it was only 2.7 of the country's electricity. This is a combination of different factors. It was not just one thing. So it was a mix of market forces, EU air quality rules, energy efficiency gains, abundance and affordable gas, a political determination to win the country off coal, and the carbon price that you mentioned earlier. So it seems that it's not, often just one policy or one driver. So, I think it's important to mention that depending on the country, there will not be one recipe fits all. And that's something that might, a challenge for the EU, which has so many different countries with a diversity of energy.
Absolutely. Now, by the way, Leslie, you mentioned the UK Brexit. The European Union will lose a lot of good inspiration coming from the United Kingdom's energy policies, because, believe it or not, but the UK has been always at the forefront of implementing sound, sustainable proactive energy policies that seek to address market failures, that seek indeed, as you said, to curb emissions. And so very clearly here, I think we will lose a lot from that. Now, what you just mentioned about the differences in national policies and strategies and energy mixes, that is crucial. But I think what everybody now increasingly understands, and that is also the other tipping point, is that we need to converge all together. And you mentioned the climate plans that all the European Union member countries actually have just been submitting to the European Commission. Well, that is part of that effort to make policies converge. So every member country now presented its plan towards 2030, and the people in the European Commission are now looking into that and grasping the full picture, putting these all together and see where, if all these policies are implemented, where we stand. And there is here big room for improvement, for, bringing and improving coordination, etc. And the critical issue is, be it to face China, be it to face the United States, etc. There's increasingly an understanding that, the national card will not help, and that the critical mass that you need to address these issues, to make the transition more efficient, to be stronger, is the European Union. And I think this is quite surprising, as we had the Brexit, etc. I mean, the Brexit did a lot of harm because we focused so much on that Brexit. So many resources were put to that. It's a bit like in the United States. So many resources are put to understanding what's happening in the White House and all that circus, and so the overall policies are not developed. So, and we have the same problem here. This is dramatic because every week that passes, the Chinese and others, progress, innovate, put state money and develop and follow their ambition. And while we somehow are held back by that.
Very interesting.
Yes.
So quickly on Ukraine, Marc-Antoine, are we going to see a
deal or no deal? No, I think the way it looks like now is that by January 1st, we will not have a gas deal. And the only thing that could change that is if it is brought to the very highest political level between Macron, Merkel, and Putin, and that basically Macron and Merkel push Putin to agree to, a reasonable compromise on Ukraine. I mean, Putin doesn't want to agree on anything so far because, he just received the good news that, the Danes have given the authorization to lay the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in their water. So now he knows that construction will come and that, the stumbling block has been lifted. But the problem is the Russians do not know exactly when the pipeline will come into operation and how it will be operated, because remember that there was an amendment that was passed to the third gas directive with a number of new provisions, and there is a big legal row now involving Nord Stream 2 against the European Commission at the European Court of Justice over these amendments, and actually there's a couple of uncertainties out there. And so my guess is we will certainly enter at least the first 10 weeks of the year 2020 without Russian gas transit for Ukraine, which basically will make gas traders win, which will probably help the US LNG industry, which will push gas prices higher in the European Union. But we do not know exactly how the weather will be, right? But voilà. Well, let's see.
Exactly.
But the thing is, so we might see the first weeks of transit halted, but then the question is, how much further can this last? And my point is, if it lasts longer than end of February, early March, then the role of gas, the image of gas, will be dramatically hurted. And that, it's a sensitive moment now in European Union energy policies and climate policies. And the risk is that gas is put in the same basket as coal, which is, we need by any means to get rid of that. Now, of course, you can argue whether that is possible, etc., etc. And many in Russia believe, gas is there to stay because it's a facilitator of the energy transition. And anyway, there's no alternative. But, there are alternatives, and the alternatives are coal more lignite power generation in Germany. The alternatives are more nuclear power generation, and the alternatives are indeed importing more US LNG, or by the way, LNG, from the global markets. And indeed trying to push for much greater efforts in energy efficiency beyond what we already know we have to do more. And overall, that will also not help to ease the relations with Russia. We are convinced by one thing, which is that if we do the European energy transition, it will come at a cheaper cost if we can have cooperative policies with Ukraine, with Russia, with Morocco, with Algeria, with Egypt, and with Turkey in that domain, rather than if we do this alone, because the marginal cost of reducing CO2 emissions, the more we advance, the cheaper that marginal cost will be in these countries in the neighborhood versus in the European Union. No?
To come back on the Ukraine potential disruption, gas disruption, I mean, the good news for European consumers is that if there is a double impact of supply disruption and cold spell, it could not happen at a better times, right? Because the EU has huge level of storage, like full storage capacity for gas, and a lot of potential LNG supply ready to be sent. And also the market, the EU market is much more interconnected, which means has much more flexibility
Absolutely.
to help neighbors in the event of a disruption. So that's why, for me, I don't see a huge risk of huge price increase, but it depends. If there is a disruption, it depends for how long there is a disruption, and as you mentioned, depends on the weather too.
No, you're right. I mean, 6 or 8 months ago, there was still a lot of concerns as to whether what will be the gas price and whether physically gas will be available. I think we can be now pretty confident that yes, gas will be physically available. There's a lot of gas in storage in Ukraine, in the European Union. The storages are filled. So yes, we can probably cope with with a few exceptions. Probably northern Italy will be a bit more difficult. A few places in southeast Poland, probably in southeast Europe here and there might be difficulties. But all in all, the market and the infrastructure can definitely cope.
Great. So, Marc-Antoine, let's move quickly to your personal and professional trajectory. So last time we put an emphasis on your big cultural background and how it contributed to your professional trajectory. And this time I would like to ask you about, as an energy professional, how do you reconcile between your professional life and your personal life, your engagement, and how do you integrate at home or outside work your vision of the energy world?
Yes, that's a vast question, but on that, Leslie, perhaps 2 or 3 thoughts. The first is I have been trying to assess, how we could best compensate our carbon footprint stemming from the airplanes that we take to attend the various professional meetings and conferences, etc., that we have. And that is and how best we could factor that into our financial yearly budget. So that's point A. Point B is that we actually have been very reassured by the latest discussions at the European level, which consist in preparing a carbon taxation on domestic and European air traffic, because basically that will solve it all. That will make it much more easier. So we know we will have to top up by say 5 or 7% the price of the air tickets that we will buy, and that will make things much easier. So I think that.
So just to make it clear, you're talking about IFRI when you invite guests and you want them to speak at your events, and you accommodate
Exactly.
for transportation.
Exactly. And then what
okay.
we try to do is to use as much possible in Paris when we order cabs for our guests to use, hydrogen or electric powered cabs. And this, and I think this, we already reach around the 50% of the orders that we do through that. So I think that is also an improvement. And personally, believe it or not, but the new thing I tried is that I ride increasingly with a bicycle to work. So it's about 8 kilometers there and 8 kilometers back every day, crossing Paris.
It's your own.
No,
It's your
my
own
own
bike
bike,
or
indeed.
Velib?
So I invested into a robust
Okay.
bike to do that, and actually to make use of the opportunities that were created by the Paris mayor, Hidalgo, who created a number of specially dedicated lanes, yes,
Lanes.
indeed, for bicycle lanes. And I think it's so it works really well in terms of the lanes are available. You avoid a lot of the traffic, but you do not avoid the pollution, I must say. And really being overground is terrible, because what you find out is that the two-wheelers are an unbelievable source of pollution. When you stop at the traffic light and you are surrounded by, say, 5 to 10 two-wheelers, and when they all start their engine at the same time, it's just terrible. And the second thing I noted is that actually the problem is not so much by the cars, although you still have a lot of old diesel cars around, but the problem is also from the public buses that are not all turned yet to natural gas or to electricity, and they are still also a large source of pollution when they start their engines. And so while it's easier to move from one point to another, you still have that pollution problem, which is terrible. And the problem is you thought that the metro is cleaner, but there were recently some tests of air quality in the Paris tube that were done, and the air quality is in many places very bad due to the brakes of the trains, and which heat up and emit fine particles. And I must say that then the dilemma is, what is worse, being inside or outside public transportation? You see, well,
right. Well, for your bike,
yes,
I
I
hope
do.
you're
Yes, I
using a
do.
helmet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Because we want a better world, but not at the expense of
Yes.
your health
You're fully
or
right.
an
No,
accident. Right.
that's absolutely necessary. Yes.
Yeah, I'm biking too in New York, and I mean I'm trying to be careful and staying in parks or in absolutely dedicated lanes. Otherwise, I find
Yes.
it's
No,
too
you're right.
dangerous.
And I must say that the direction is to reduce the number of cars in cities, to electrify all the small freight vehicles, and all the delivery vehicles, and to ban diesel cars in cities. I think in Paris it will be enacted in the next 5 years, and I think that drive is unstoppable, and everybody ultimately will benefit. But the key is, for me, we should electrify the two-wheelers and learn from the obviously the Chinese experience there, because this is a major source of pollution.
Yeah, as long as the electricity
Yes, but
comes
that in
from
France is
renewable,
low carbon,
right?
so we can do it.
Right. Yeah.
Yes,
Not
exactly.
that
That's
much
true.
in China yet, but yeah. Great, Marc-Antoine, a pleasure to have you on, and thank you again for your
Thank you so
time,
much,
and we'll talk
Leslie,
again
and
soon.
let's be in touch. And thanks for this great initiative.
That concludes our Energy Vista podcast, which was recorded on November 8, 2019. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck.